Good morning, everyone. This hearing will come to order. This hearing titled Haiti on the Brink, Assessing U.S. Policy Towards a Country in Crisis, will focus on U.S. policy towards Haiti and whether it is advancing our strategic objectives and contributing to peace and institutional strengthening in the country. Without objection, all members might have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and strenuous material for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. I will now make an opening statement and then turn it over to the ranking member for his opening statement. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. This hearing comes at a critical time for Haiti. For much of the past year, the country has been gripped by a political and economic crisis. Many factors are contributing to this concerning situation. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, with nearly 60% of Haitians living on less than $2 a day. Increasing inflation and rising costs of living have made life even more difficult for many Haitians already struggling to get by. At the same time, the administration of President Jovenel Moïse has been unable to form a government, and the legislature has rejected his last 2 nominees for Prime Minister. Scheduled elections did not take place in October, creating the real possibility that the Chamber of Deputies will dissolve in January and President Moïse will be ruling by decree. Yet the street demonstrations have been seen in Haiti and appears to reflect even deeper discontent. It seems that the Haitian people have had enough of political elites who they feel do not represent them and advocate for their own interests. I hear this frustration. As someone who is deeply engaged in our hemisphere and who wants the best for Haiti, I believe it is completely unacceptable that some Haitian politician leaders are living lavishly while the people continue to suffer. I know that for many Haitian people, corruption is not an abstract concept. Corruption helps explain why half of the country is undernourished. Corruption contributes to Haiti's extremely low adult literacy rate of just 60%, and corruption tells an important part of the story behind the roads that still have not been replaced following the devastating earthquake in 2010. In other words, the funds stolen by government officials through the Petro-Caribbean program did not merely disappear into thin air. These were dollars that should have been used to improve people's lives and were instead used to line the pockets of the political powerful. With today's hearing, I want to send a clear message to the Haitian people that members of the United States Congress recognize this profound injustice. This hearing is also about assessing U.S. policy and foreign assistance programs. I know that we have dedicated staff working for USAID and the State Department in Haiti who are trying to help improve the situation in the country. But I believe we need to think critically about how we can better support the Haitian people. For instance, I am very worried about the human rights situation in the country. I urge the State Department to push for full investigations into the Saline massacre last year and allegation of excessive use of force against protesters in recent months. It is clear to me that a prosperous and fully democratic Haiti is in the United States' best interest. Moreover, the United States' relationship with the Haitian people is not a one-way street. We know that Haitian Americans and Haitian-born residents living in the United States provide a crucial support for their home country. and lift up our economies as well. That is part of why I have consistently defended temporarily protected status for Haitians. I want to thank my good friend Senator Menendez for issuing a report last month that highlighted the contributions of 56,000 Haitian TPC holders who have been living in our country and strengthening our economies. I will continue to work with my colleagues to defend TPS for Haitians. I will also work to protect the United States taxpayers' resources. It is for this reason that I will continue to oppose any effort to use U.S. assistance for funding the Haitian military, which is unnecessary and diverts resources away from the national police. I appreciate Congressman Levin's leadership on this and his deep engagement with Haiti. I hope that this hearing enables us to have an honest discussion about the extent to which our current policy is helping combat corruption, tackle poverty, and promote human rights and the rule of law in Haiti. And I look forward to a bipartisan conversation about what more can be done to help the Haitian people. Thank you, and I now turn to the ranking member who's not here, but he just showed up. So this is what we call perfect timing in Congress. My good friend Tenyoho from Florida. Sorry, I started.
How you doing?
Take your time.
Apologize for being late for everybody. Thank you for being here. Mr. Chairman, since its transition from dictatorship to democracy in 1987, Haiti has struggled with political instability, extreme poverty, corruption, and other endemic challenges that have hindered its growth and prosperity. According to the World Bank, Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It had a GDP per capita of $870 in 2018 and ranked 168 out of 189 countries in the Human Development Index. Nearly 60% of the population lives below the national poverty line. 24% make less than $1.23 per day. While the extreme poverty is largely a product of corruption and inept governance, devastating environmental disasters have also contributed, such as the 2010 earthquake and Hurricane Matthew in 2016, which caused damage in Haiti equal to 32% of the country's GDP. The United States is committed to supporting Haitian people and has a vested interest in seeing a prosperous and stable democracy in Haiti. Further, Haiti recognizes interim President Juan Guaido as the leader of Venezuela and maintains relationships with Taiwan and should be commended for doing so. However, recent events in the country highlight the continued fragility of Haiti's democracy. During current President Moïse's tenure, the country has seen widespread unrest and allegations of government corruption that have resulted in the resignation of 2 prime ministers and widespread calls for the president's resignation. However, the president has refused to step down, and sectors of the government have ground to a halt. For example, Haitian legislators have blocked efforts to confirm the new prime minister and foiled multiple attempts to ratify the government. This has led to increased social unrest, demonstrations resulting in the death of more than 42 people and hundreds injured. Further, the lack of electoral law threatens to force the dissolution of Congress, and the continued postponement of election is very concerning. The United States remains a major donor of foreign assistance to Haiti. In fiscal year 19, the U.S. provided $139.8 million in assistance, and the Trump administration's fiscal year requested included $145.5 million assistance. This assistance is focused on emergency food aid and distribution, global health programs, education, and security. Further, the United Nations has a continued presence over the last 15 years. Various UN initiatives have focused on restoring order and building the Haitian National Police into a professional police force of over 14,000 officers in charge of domestic security. However, the police remained underfunded and are in need of continued support. The UN's mission for justice and support in Haiti which replaced a larger peacekeeping mission in 2017, sought to strengthen judicial institutions and protect human rights. In 2019, the United Nations transitioned its mandate to an integrated office in Haiti to advise the government on strengthening political stability and good governance through an inclusive national dialogue. Going forward, the United States must continue to support the Haitian people and work towards economic prosperity, democratic stability, and respect for human rights. We want a peaceful and inclusive resolution to the political crisis and urge all sides to respect the rule of law and the Haitian Constitution. At the same time, the Haitian government has a responsibility to be responsive to the needs of the Haitian people and investigate all reports of human rights violations. I look forward to this hearing. Here we are in the 21st century. I had people come into my office in Gainesville, Florida from Haiti that are in pharmacy school, and we talked about the situation in Haiti. He wants to graduate in pharmacy and go back to help rebuild Haiti. We talking about water. He said less than 20% of the people in Haiti have potable water. This is unacceptable. We're in the 21st century in the Western Hemisphere. It's not from a lack of resources. It's from a lack of people that get elected or put into office that will not put the people of Haiti first. They put themselves first, and this is something that has to change. And I would hope in the Western Hemisphere we'd all come together to make this fruition and reality. With that, I yield back, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I want to welcome at this time Congresswoman Barbara Lee from California and Congresswoman Federica Wilson from Florida. Thank you. And we will now go to our panel. I will now introduce Mr. Pierre Esperance, Executive Director at the Haitian National Human Rights Defense Network. As a leading human rights defender in Haiti, Mr. Esperance has worked with the National Human Rights Defense Network since 1995 to promote human rights, rule of law, and government accountability in Haiti. In 2002, he was awarded the Human Rights Award from the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince. Mr. Esperance, we welcome you. Thank you. We will then hear from Ms. Emanuela Tujo. Ms. Tujo is an economist and a leader of the Petro Challenger and No Pop Domi social movement demanding greater government accountability and transparency in the wake of Petro-Caribe scandal. Ms. Tujo, thank you for joining us today. We will then hear from Mr. Daniel Erickson, Managing Director of Blue Star Strategies and Senior Fellow at the Penn Biden Center for Diplomacy and Global Engagement. He previously served as a special advisor to Vice President Biden and as a senior policy advisor at the U.S. Department of State. Mr. Erickson, thank you for joining us. We will then hear from Ms. Leon Marie Hermiton. Not bad, right? Born in Haiti, Ms. Hermiton grew up in New York City and holds a Juris Doctor from University of California at Berkeley and a master's degree in urban environmental planning. She is the Director of Development and Communication and Strategic Planning at Saint La Haitian Neighborhood Center, an organization focused on supporting South Florida's Asian community. Ms. Hamilton, thank you. Finally, we will hear from Dr. Antonio Carastasu, Regional Director for Latin American and the Caribbean at the International Republican Institute. Dr. Carastasu manages programs and initiatives across 16 countries in the hemisphere focused on governance, legislative strengthening, political inclusion, and election integrity. He holds a bachelor's degree in history and political science from the University of Florida, as well as a master's and doctorate in international studies from the University of Miami. Dr. Carastasu, thank you for being here. I ask the witnesses to please limit your testimony to 5 minutes, and without objection, your prepared statement, written statements will be made a part of the record. Mr. Esperance, you and your interpreter will be allowed 10 minutes to provide the subcommittee with simultaneous translation. This is the first time we're doing this. Would you please tell them that? Non-committee members will also be joining us in this hearing. Without objection, I ask for unanimous consent so that the members of Congress who are not members of the subcommittee may be recognized to participate in the hearing and question the witnesses after subcommittee members have had the opportunity to do so. Do I hear unanimous consent? Thank you.
No objection.
Okay, Mr. Esperance, and now turn to you.
Chairman Sires ak tout lot membre commission yo,
Chairman Sears and all the members of the committee,
nap di nou merci pour audience sa nou fè sou situation droit moun en Haïti.
we'd like to thank you for this hearing that you have on the ongoing situation in Haiti.
Depuis plus passé 20 ans, pa gen yon audience ki fèt nan Congrès américain sou situation droit moun en Haïti.
It's been 20 years, in fact, more than 20 years since we've had a hearing on human rights issues in Haiti in Congress.
Nan mwen se Pierre Espérance, mwen se directeur exécutif RNDDH.
My name is Pierre Esperance, and I'm the executive director of RNDDH.
RNDDH son organisation droit moun ki travaille nan question éducation, promotion, observation et protection droit moun en Haïti.
RNDDH is a human rights organization that works on education, promotion, and also the monitoring of human rights in Haiti.
Nan mi tan yon ban violation droit moun en Haïti, m'a partagé 5 inquiétudes avec nous.
Amongst many pressing human rights violation issues in Haiti, I will highlight on 5 of them.
Premièrement, c'est prolifération gang armé yo qui joine protection autorité dans l'État.
The first one will be the proliferation of armed gangs that are being protected by the state.
Depuis 2018, autorité dans l'État exécutif là utiliser gang armé yo pour faire répression contre opposants yo.
Since 2018, the current administration in Haiti has used armed gangs to repress political dissent in Haiti.
Résultat, gagné pour pipiti 5 massacres qui fait dans le pays.
As a result, we've had at least 5 massacres in Haiti.
Plus gros massacre là, c'est massacre La Saline qui fait dans le mois de novembre 2018.
The largest massacre was the one that was perpetrated in November 2018 in La Saline.
71 moun mouri dans massacre ça, grand moun avec ti moun.
71 people were killed during that massacre, children and adults.
11 femmes violées et puis gen 400 pour pipiti gen 400 maisons qui détruites.
11 women were raped and at least 400 homes were destroyed.
Et là on prend 5 massacres ça yo ou mettez ensemble pour pipiti gen 127 moun qui mouri.
When you take the totality of those massacres, there has been at least 127 people that have been killed.
Avec prolifération gang armé yo, insécurité a augmenté dans le pays.
With the proliferation of gangs, insecurity in Haiti, there's been also an increase in insecurity in the country.
Gang yo pi bien équipé, yo pi bien armé que la police là.
The gangs are, in fact, even better armed than the police itself.
Pour seulement année ça, gen 44 policiers qui mouri.
Just just for this year, we've had 44 police officers that were killed.
Deuxièmement, c'est violence ak répression sous moun k'ap manifester contre autorité yo.
Secondly, we have violence and repression against those who are demonstrating against the Haitian government.
Sorti juillet 2018 pour arriver journée jodi a, pour pipiti gen 187 moun qui mouri et 42 là-dedans yo recevoir yon balle dans tête.
Since July 2018 to today, we've had at least 187 people that have been killed, and 42 of those people were shot in the head.
Troisièmement, c'est politisation appareil justice là.
Thirdly, there is a politicization of the Haitian judicial system.
Par exemple, tout cas qui gain implication autorité yo, ou bien nous t'a dit autorité yo impliqué là-dedans yo, tant que La Saline et Petro-Caribé yo bloqué dans appareil justice là.
For example, all cases that are implicating authorities like the La Saline case and the Petro-Caribe case, they're all blocked by the judicial system.
Autorité yo utiliser appareil justice là pour yo persécuter moun qui pas d'accord avec yo et par exemple yo arrêté yo, jeté yo dans prison arbitrairement.
The authority used the judicial system to persecute opposition members. For instance, there's been arbitrary arrest of protesters.
Quatrièmement, c'est détention préventive prolongée.
Fourth is the question of pretrial detention.
74% moun qui dans prison captant une décision en justice, eh ben, et 74% moun qui dans prison attendent une décision de justice.
74% of people are still awaiting trial from the prison population.
Capacité prison nous yo capable prendre seulement 3000 moun.
The prison population can only accommodate about 3,000 people.
Et jodi a nous gen plus passé 11000 moun qui dans prison.
But in fact, today we have more than 11,000 people who are imprisoned.
Cinquièmement, c'est non-respect échéance constitutionnelle yo.
Fifth is the non-respect of constitutional process.
Autorité haïtienne yo te doué organiser élection année ça dans mois d'octobre pour renouveler parlement.
The Haitian authorities were supposed to have elections that was scheduled for October of this year, October 2019.
Élection pas faite pour raison ça yo.
The elections did not take place for the following reasons.
Président pas utiliser majorité qu'elle gagne dans le Parlement pour faire voter une loi électorale avec un budget.
The president did not use his majority in parliament to pass an electoral law or a budget.
Et exécutif là introduit un nouveau cadre d'identification nationale illégalement.
And they also introduced a new national ID card that was illegally done.
Illégal parce que nouveau cadre d'identification nationale ça, nouveau système ça, il pas de joindre approbation ni parlement ni cour supérieur des comptes.
It is illegal because this was not approved neither by parliament, by the legislators, or by the National Court of Auditors.
Résultat, en janvier 2020, pas de parlement encore, parlement pas existé et président pour diriger pays par décret.
As a result, in January of next year, January 2020, the Haitian parliament will no longer exist and the president will be able to rule only by decree.
Situation ça préoccupé haïtien yo en pile parce que président impliqué dans corruption.
It is a very concerning issue for the Haitian population because the administration is involved in corruption.
Li impliqué dans violation systématique droits moun avec et supporter gang yo.
Also in systematic violation of human rights and also in its support for gangs.
Avec toute situation ça que n'a vivre en dans pays ya, population haïtienne nan mandé pour président démissionner.
Considering all the situation that we're going through right now in Haiti, the Haitian population is asking for the resignation of the current government.
Donc pour raison ça, on a demandé Congrès américain.
But because of those reasons, we're asking the U.S. Congress to do the following.
Pour encourager autorité haïtienne yo pour yo suspendre bay gang yo zam et puis protéger yo.
To encourage the Haitian authorities to stop arming and protecting the gangs.
Suspendre politiser la police là avec appareil justice là.
To stop politicizing the police and the judicial institutions.
Combattre contrebande nan.
Fight against contraband.
Et encourager autorité haïtienne yo pour yo bay explication sur fond Petro-Caribé yo avec massacre qui fait dans pays depuis 2018.
And also encourage Haitian authorities to provide information regarding the Petro-Caribé funds and also the massacres perpetrated since 2018.
Et pour bay explication tout avec nouveau système qui est venu pour question cadre d'identification nationale là.
And to better explain the rationale behind the creation of the national ID card, the new national ID card.
Et pour autorité américaine yo bloquer zam illégales qui sorti aux États-Unis rentrer en Haïti.
And also for the US authorities to monitor the illegal entry of arms and ammunition that are coming to Haiti.
Merci pour attention.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jean. Yeah, to Jean, I guess.
Thank you all for the opportunity to speak. For the past 18 months, the Haitian population have engaged in massive nationwide protests demanding increased government accountability. A movement called Petro Challenge emerged with two main grievances: government impunity and government corruption. This accountability movement is fueled by reports from both the Senate and the Court of Auditor outlining the misappropriation of an estimated $3.8 billion from the Petro-Caribe Fund. Successive Haitian administrations and officials have been implicated, including sitting President Moïse. The response to the nationwide accountability movement has been varied. There are attempts to undermine accountability efforts. None of the officials implicated in the Petro-Caribe corruption scandal have been held judicially accountable. Violence is used against protesters. Amnesty International's October report called on the government to protect the rights of protesters. There are attacks on the press. Journalists reporting on corruption and the popular movement have received threats and come under attack. Some even lost their lives. Armed gangs linked to state officials massacre civilians. They do this to repress dissent in neighborhoods such as La Saline and Bel Air. No one has faced charges for these crimes. This is a latent crisis that has finally exploded. Haitians, Petro challengers in particular, are committed to fighting corruption, which is robbing them of the future. Besides, the economic situation in Haiti has worsened towards Moïse's presidency. Armed gangs that enjoy the protection of state officials proliferate. There is a consensus that Haiti's governmental system is broken and must be transformed to actually foster social equity and inclusion. Citizens from all sectors of civil society in both rural and urban areas are calling for the president to step down. To date, the US administration has largely stood by the Moïse government. The US has been recommending dialogue since 2018, but the implication of high-level officials in acts of corruption and human rights violation has thwarted their legitimacy to lead national dialogues. Besides, the demand of the population is for systemic change. The US has recommended the formation of a new government, but it is morally difficult to encourage citizens to work with a president that has been indicted in corruption. President Moïse has already formed 2 governments during his 2 years in office. The reshuffling of the cabinet will not resolve the current crisis. The US called to organize election, but Haitian citizens see election as problematic and exclusionary within the current context. After the needed systematic reform, organizing election is a priority for the transitional government. Haitian youth and civil society groups are willing to engage in the electoral process more actively in order to influence change. Moving forward, it appears increasingly likely that the president will not be able to complete his term. In January, the president will rule by decree without a legitimate prime minister and a parliament. This is a serious governance imbalance that raises several concerns. Many political actors and civil society organizations are collaborating to define a roadmap for the political transition. As of now, the international community does not support a political transition, but they must listen to the legitimate demand of the Haitian people. If the US wants to support a sustainable way forward for Haiti, it must finally take its lead from Haitian civil society and support systemic reform. Corrupt officials cannot fight against corruption. The USG's failure to stand with the legitimate demand of the current movement provides political cover for government corruption and impunity. That further undermines the right of the population, democracy, the rule of law, and stability. The US's decades-long focus on short-term stability over rule of law has failed and must be reevaluated. Thanks for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Erickson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Yoho, for organizing this hearing and for your opening remarks, which I found to be quite wise. And I would also like to thank the other members of the committee and of Congress who are here today. I will briefly address the current situation in Haiti, but the focus of my remarks will be on what the United States and the broader international community should do to address the Haitian crisis in 2020. When I visited Haiti last month, one thing became very clear. Haiti today is experiencing its most profound political, economic, and social crisis in a generation. And it will get worse next January when the Congress dissolves, there's no political accord, the economy withers, insecurity worsens, corruption remains unchecked, and millions will face emergency levels of food insecurity. How did Haiti's crisis become so severe? I see three overlapping crises. The first is the decades-long struggle for Haiti to achieve a basic level of governability and a sustainable economy. The second crisis emerges from the developments and decisions during the administration of President Jovenel Moïse, who assumed office in February 2017, and the resulting political gridlock, the protests, and the country lockdown, or paye-loc, as is known in Creole, that have devastated the economy and jeopardized the well-being of millions of Haitians. And all of this has occurred against the backdrop of a third crisis, a crisis of apathy and indifference among Haiti's international allies and partners. It is this crisis of apathy that I believe this committee is best positioned to address. Haiti has suffered periods of sharp deterioration before: coups, earthquakes, hurricanes, political unrest. And in virtually every instance, the international community, led by the United States, has sought to identify core problems, work towards practical solutions, and reduce human suffering. Not every engagement has been successful, but important lessons have been learned. The first is that if the United States does not lead, no one else will step up to take our place. Second, the results have been more successful and more sustainable when the U.S. has been joined by partners across the hemisphere, as well as allies in Europe and key international institutions like the Organization of American States, the United Nations, and the multilateral development banks. The third lesson is that while Haiti will never achieve political consensus, political compromise can be attainable, but only when the international community joins forces and Haitian political leaders understand both the stakes and the consequences. I believe the time is ripe to propose new approaches. Without a change in course, Haiti's deterioration will continue in ways that will be damaging both for the Haitian people and for the national security of the United States and our nearest neighbors in the Caribbean. As we turn to 2020, a year that will mark the 30th anniversary of Haiti's first democratic election and the 10th anniversary of the tragic Haitian earthquake that claimed so many lives, Haiti must assume a more central role on the U.S. foreign policy agenda. As an initial series of steps, I recommend the following. The first is that the United States Secretary of State should convene a ministerial-level meeting of the Haiti Core Group, which consists of counterparts from Brazil, Canada, France, Germany, Spain, the European Union, the United Nations, and the Organization of American States, with the objective of formulating a comprehensive strategy to help Haiti meet humanitarian needs and create a pathway for negotiations with Haitian partners for an agreed time frame for new congressional and presidential elections. Second, the United States and the core group should then spearhead a Haiti economic strategy and humanitarian relief session on the margins of the IMF World Bank annual meetings that will occur in April 2020, including international relief groups and NGOs, with the objective of identifying how to rapidly surge food aid and economic support into Haiti's hardest hit communities and ward off the possibility of severe malnutrition or even famine forecast to affect up to 4 million Haitians in 2020. Third, I believe we need a comprehensive review of U.S. and international security assistance to Haiti with the objective of strengthening the Haitian National Police and ensuring that funds are not diverted either into the Haitian Army or paramilitary apparatuses that threaten the rule of law and human rights. Fourth, I believe that the U.S. should consider the extension of temporary protected status, or TPS, for Haitians in the United States past the 2021 expiration date and examine the possibilities for humanitarian parole for needy Haitians or for those whose lives are at serious risk. And lastly, the U.S. Congress could consider establishing a short-term working group of members to create a more active role for Congress to monitor developments and ensure that Haiti occupy a prominent place on the U.S. foreign policy agenda next year with the aim of a full restoration of an elected democratic government as soon as possible and certainly by no later than 2021. The crisis in Haiti, in conclusion, is deep, complex, and cannot be solved either by the Haitians alone, or by the United States, or by any other single country or international actor. However, I am confident the members of this committee, working together with the U.S. administration and the broader international community, can do considerably more to help put Haiti back to a prominent place on the U.S. regional and international agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hermanton?
Good morning. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the chair ranking member and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I also like to thank Congresswoman Wilson for the opportunity for the diaspora, the Haitian diaspora, to be represented. This hearing is timely because Haiti is yet again at another crossroads. We face yet again another crisis, but this time it's man-made. I'm really humbled by the great presentations made from my predecessors here, and so I will not talk about the political situation. I will limit my remarks to our concerns from the diaspora's perspective, both the humanitarian crisis and the issue of security. I'm here as a member of the Haitian diaspora. In the United States alone, there are over 1 million persons of Haitian ancestry, the majority of whom are naturalized or US-born citizens. Our diaspora is a very diverse one, and we don't all speak in one voice. But I can speak with total certainty that we are united on key points. One, that we are extremely concerned about what's happening in Haiti today, and that Haiti's poverty offends us deeply. We are hardworking people with exemplary work ethic and entrepreneurial spirit. Our people deserve better. Like many of you, we are confounded by the lack of results from US investments in Haiti. And like the petrol challengers demand to know what happened to the billions of Petro-Caribbean funds, we too want to know about the impact of billions of US taxpayer dollars invested in Haiti for the past 30 years. Why are you still calling Haiti the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere after our government has invested so much in so many programs? We all agree that the current status quo, which supports corruption and violation of the rule of law, must be done with. It's time. We all agree that Haiti needs to invest in education, health infrastructure, agricultural reform, job creation, and constitutional reforms. We all agree on that. And we also believe that Haitians must resolve their problems. First, I will quickly talk about the humanitarian crisis, which has been covered in depth here. The crisis began in 2018, and as you can imagine, in a fragile economy like Haiti, the smallest shock can upend the lives of a great majority. One of the ways that many in Haiti have been able to survive is with support of family and friends in the diaspora. According to the World Bank, remittances from the diaspora to Haiti reached record levels in 2018, amounting to $3.1 billion from $2.4 billion in 2017, a 30% increase. This current crisis has a direct financial impact on Haitian American households, as we are often the economic lifeline for families back home. Data indicates that 90% of remittances come from North America. I will skip and talk about the security crisis. This crisis that we're currently facing also has a lot to do with insecurity, and that affects us in many ways. We know that the government, many of us in the diaspora are concerned by the inability of the Haitian government to guarantee our security. We're concerned about the gang arms. We're concerned about what appears to be an extremely chaotic situation, and that has forced us to cancel personal, humanitarian, and business trips to Haiti. When it comes to Haiti, the U.S. has made it clear that it believes in the elections and democratic process, but has ignored the Haitian people's relentless demands for change. It's clear, paradoxically, that the U.S.'s position is more flexible in other parts of the world. In Hong Kong, for example, we proudly stand with the people and not the elected leaders. We believe, as Haitians and as Americans, that it is important for the U.S. to listen and respect the voices of the people. We Haitian Americans will welcome bipartisan support for the Haitian people in their call for justice and social and economic inclusion. We also want to encourage you to cover cross-border corruptions. We know where the dollars are siphoned to. We need them to be brought back to Haiti. We also recommend that the U.S. work in partnership with Haitians locally and the diaspora in the United States and abroad, as opposed to the big international development organization. We need to be more creative and stop using unsuccessful strategies with the same actors, and I'm talking about USAID, who propose the same programs under different titles to get the same results. The Haitian people in the diaspora demand accountability and transparency, neither of which is always forthcoming under the current USAID practices. I will take this last seconds to sound alarmed about the humanitarian crisis that is in the making in Haiti. We know it's going to happen. And as Mr. Erickson just stated, it's going to be of gigantic proportion. Very scary. We cannot close our ears, mind, or our hearts. We have to be prepared. The indicators do not lie. And again, we're talking about the policies. U.S. agencies in Haiti often take the route and funnel their support through bilateral and multilateral agencies, the usual suspect. We believe that the better strategy is to leverage the diaspora to maximize U.S. investments. To quote, I will end with a quote from Martin Luther King: "Why should there be hunger and deprivation in any land, in any city, at any table, when man has the resources, the scientific know-how to provide all mankind with the basic necessities of life? There's no deficit in human resources. The deficit is in human will."
Thank you, Dr. Garastazu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Yoho, distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. Thank you also, I must add, for organizing a hearing on this topic critical to U.S. interests and the future of democratic governance in Haiti. Since the inauguration of President Moise in February 2017, widespread protests have become commonplace, severely impacting Haiti's governability. Mass protests swelled in September 2019, really with no end in sight. Although protests are waning and streets are quieter, demonstrations will likely continue, given the opposition's demand the president step down. Furthermore, the fact that elections for the entire Chamber of Deputies, 2/3 of the Senate, and all local officials should have taken place on October 27th of this year continues to exacerbate the ongoing political impasse and an increasingly fragile environment, creating a governance crisis in the new year. An unstable Haiti poses a risk to U.S. national security. Haiti is a large recipient of U.S. aid in the region, second only to Colombia. U.S. assistance to Haiti has traditionally been focused on health, and in fiscal year 2020, only 4% of the requested funding was allocated for democracy, human rights, and governance, while 80% was for health-related initiatives. Concentration of development assistance at the national level, however, has shown few results, as evidenced by the current political and economic conditions. Efforts at bolstering the capacity of local officials and civil society organizations, youth, private sector, and using the talents and resources of the diaspora community will provide a sustainable path toward Haiti's journey to self-reliance. Targeted foreign assistance on democracy, human rights, and governance should really be a priority. Geopolitically, Haiti serves as an important U.S. ally in the region. Haiti can be considered a partner in countering malign Chinese interference by preventing China from concluding, through its Belt and Road Initiative, more opaque and economically questionable infrastructure projects that bring unsustainable debt burdens in this region and increase independence on China. From 2018 to 2019, there has also been a shift in Haiti's approach to voting in the Organization of American States. By not recognizing the legitimacy of Nicolas Maduro as president of Haiti, Haiti has also taken a similar stance on the increasingly authoritarian government in Nicaragua. Building the capacity of local governments and providing support outside the capital, Port-au-Prince, I believe, is critical to enhancing accountability and state presence and bringing institutions closer to citizens. Since 2016, IRI has worked with municipal officials and civil society organizations in Haiti's greater north to strengthen their institutional capacity, promote citizen engagement, and encourage marginalized groups, including youth and women, to have a voice and participate in political processes. Developing political and administrative skills at the local level is much more effective than the current top-down approach adopted by many foreign assistance donors. IRI has also been working with local CSOs across the Grand North to improve advocacy and oversight of local governments. The Institute has supported the creation of grassroots departmental networks with support from USAID. The creation of these networks is significant because of the centralized nature of decision-making in Haiti and the need to provide a voice to leaders outside the capital and at the local level. There are many political, economic, and security challenges, as we've discussed in Haiti's democratic governance landscape, that should be addressed through U.S. foreign assistance. A cornerstone of this strategy is strengthening local Haitian institutions. The following recommendations could be a step in the right direction. First, a sustained focus on local governments and bolstering the capacity of civil society organizations is necessary. Second, a focus on youth to serve as agents of positive change in their communities is critical. Third, there is a need for more public opinion research to better understand the challenges Haitians face to effectively design and implement U.S. foreign assistance programs. Fourth, private sector engagement has an important role to play to ensure the sustainability of foreign investments. Lastly, the U.S. should continue to work with Haiti's diaspora community as a critical element in the foreign policy assistance process. Assessing U.S. policy toward Haiti, a country in perpetual crisis, is never easy and really can be frustrating. Yet U.S. commitment to Haiti needs to remain strong. Haiti's proximity to the United States, its regional geopolitical implications, and relevance to our national security has never been more important. Supporting a strong, committed, and empowered local governance in Haiti is but one economically sensible tool at the disposal of the U.S. foreign policy apparatus. Thank you very much, and look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. And now we will go into question, and I'll start with myself and then the ranking member and the other members that are here. This question is for Mr. Esperance. Mr. Esperance, I give you a great deal of credit for speaking up on human rights in Haiti. You want to translate what I'm... Oh, okay. Because you're living there now. And my question is, how concerned are you for your safety? Since they have so many gangs.
Moi pense que travail m'a fait c'est un challenge, c'est un défi.
I believe that the work that I'm doing is a challenge.
Pas jamais pensé de sécurité moi parce que moi capable de déplacer m'aller n'importe côté.
I never think about my own security because I can move around and go where I want to go.
Mais m'a pensé avec monde qui dans quartier populaire qui pas qu'à déplacer, qui a massacré, pas aucun côté pour y aller.
But I'm thinking about the people who live in popular neighborhoods that are being massacred. They cannot go anywhere and they cannot move around as I can.
Militant droit moun en Haïti, militer dans question droit moun en Haïti, c'est pas facile.
Fighting for human rights in Haiti is not something that's easy.
Moi victime déjà.
I've been a victim.
Gain en pile menace.
There are many threats.
Mais m'a continuer travailler.
But I'll keep on working. I'll keep on doing my work.
Thank you. You know, I visited Haiti, I think 2 years ago. And one of the things that troubled me the most is when we met with the Prime Minister. He's talking about reinstating the army. And to me, that was an indication that he's just not serious about taking care of his people. I cannot believe that an island that small, or a place that small, would need an army. I pointed out to him that Costa Rica doesn't have an army, and they're doing well. I pointed out to him that I visited the police barracks, one of the police barracks, and they didn't even have a table to sit down to have lunch. His answer was that the Constitution of Haiti requires an army. Well, Constitution can be changed, and the people come before anything else. So if you're going to spend that money on creating an army, why not invest it in the needs of the people? I told them that I would never support any money for Haiti that goes to the Army in this Congress. And the impression now that I get from everyone here is that this situation could get out of hand very quickly. And I'm very concerned for the people of Haiti. So, Mr. Erickson, if this situation gets out of hand quickly, who should step in? Because obviously there's corruption at the highest level. There are gangs roaming all over Haiti. Who steps in? I mean, I know you mentioned about the European Union and everybody else. I mean, they got their issues. So is it time for somebody else to step in?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. A few points I would like to make. The first is, for a long time, the United Nations had stepped in with the support of the U.S., Latin America, and others. And from 2004 to 2019, there was a UN peacekeeping force, which was large at the beginning and then tailed off at the end. Now there's a smaller political mission, but there's no peacekeeping force in Haiti today, which is, I think, an important distinction from the past several years. Secondly, what Haiti really needs is a functional Haitian national police and a judicial system. And in fact, the Haitian National Police has become, and there are still problems, admittedly, but has become a more professionalized and larger force over the last 10 years with the support of the United States and with the support of the United Nations. I do not think that the Haitian Army is the correct approach for the Haitian government to take at this time. And
my concern, I hate to interrupt, but
Sure.
my concern is, I think Mr. Sprung pointed out that 41 police officers were killed this year. I mean, who would want to join the police department when you have this kind of atrocity going on?
No, I mean, it's an excellent point. I think that in essence, what's required in Haiti right now is some sort of political solution that can alleviate the protests, restart the economy, and get some semblance of governance. And the concern I have right now is that solution is not going to emerge from Haiti's political actors without intensified international pressure and diplomatic engagement. It is possible that what you allude to, basically a larger breakdown that forces someone to step in, I can't name who that would be, internationally or otherwise, could take place, but I think that's still preventable, but only if we get to a political accord and the clock is ticking, because Congress, most of it, will cease to be in office in Haiti in early January. And that's going to leave a president who's already extremely embattled, ruling by decree without any broader sense of political legitimacy.
Thank you. I now go to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you all. Oh, did he have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah. OK. Et Haïti pas besoin de l'armée qu'on est là pour plusieurs raisons.
Haiti does not need an army right now, and that's for many reasons.
Et ça nous besoin, c'est pour autorité renforcer la police là avec la justice.
What we need is for the authorities to reinforce the police and also the judicial system.
Et si yo bay police là moyen pour le faire travail li capable bay sécurité dans pays.
And if they give to the police the means to do their work, they can actually provide security inside the country.
Et
My time is up. I need to go to the other members. Thank you very much. You want to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate everybody's testimony. Dr. Garastasu, go Gators. That's right. For everybody else that's not a Gator, sorry you couldn't get in. Can I ask a question to the audience? How many people are from Haiti or lived in Haiti? Wow, that's a good representation. I live in Florida. I represent Florida's 3rd Congressional District, where the University of Florida is. And I've lived in Florida since the early 60s. And Haiti has been an issue all that time. We've heard it referred to as a sewer hole. I probably have said that myself over the years. And it wasn't President Trump that was the first to say that. We've heard this over and over again. And Mrs. Hermanton, you brought up something that the chairman and I said before you spoke. The people of Haiti are hard-working people. We have them in our state, we have them in our district, and I've known a lot of them. But yet there's that narrative out there that there's this problem with Haiti that I think, Mr. Erickson, you brought up that the world has become immune to Haiti because it's, you know, it's just Haiti. You know, that's what Haiti does. How do we change that narrative? You know, and I've got the Foreign Affairs Committee Republicans' talking points. The U.S. supports rule of law, adherence to the Constitution, and promotion of democracy in Haiti. Since 2010, or since approximately the last 10 years, we have invested $3 billion as a nation. $3 billion. And I hear this all the time through different countries. Rule of law, lack of corruption, you know, build democracies. And we hear this over and over again. And I think, Ms. Hermanton, you brought it up. It's like a broken record. We say these things and we check them off because we feel good about it, but the results don't change on the ground. And I asked for the people of Haiti, how many people have lived there or are from there? You're the ones. This is your country. What do we need to do to make a difference in Haiti that we haven't done in the past? We can do another USA project or, you know, what was their last thing? Bring food over. How effective is bringing gross quantities of food? How effective is that to getting it out to the people that really need it? If you go ahead.
Well, bringing loads of food to the people is part of the structural issues that Haiti faces because Haiti is an agricultural nation,
Right.
which produces food.
And
so
we're killing it.
when you bring loads of rice, when you bring imported food, you destabilize.
Exactly, and we
cause-
know that, but
Yes.
yet policymakers or people that run these programs don't get it.
No.
But yet it's a way for us to get it out there. Let me go on to something because what I see, I heard somebody say, I can get you to the dance floor. How well you learn to dance is up to you. We can bring these programs, but if we don't have somebody that's a leader in Haiti that is willing to stand up and say, I am going to do what's best for the people of Haiti, nothing's going to change because I forget which one, I think it was you, Dr. Stazu, staying focused on local government, staying focused on youth. But if there is not stable government, if there is not rule of law, if there is not respect for the rule of law or respect for the individual human rights, you can do all that you want, but I'm going to have to come back next year and help you do it again, and the next year. We have to have somebody that is willing to stand up in Haiti, and the Haitian people need to demand this. We can support that movement, but we can't do a top-down from America that says you need a democracy. I want a stable government in Haiti that is best for the Haitian people that we can work with, that'll put what's best for the people. Go ahead, you're going to say something.
Thank you, Ranking Member. No, absolutely agree. And I think for sustainability, there needs to be political will. There needs to be champions within the community to really bring this to bear. And I think strengthening the local institutions, working with the local governments who have the voice of the people, who see the people, where the people can actually see change, is very important. It's also very important to have these structures in place so that health aid or any other aid you want has a bedrock from which to stand. So these political champions, I think, are critical.
I'm running out of time, but I would love for all of you to triage it. We know what the problems are. We can't fix them all at one time. We have to start somewhere, and it has to start with some basic things, and it has to be rule of law and respect for each other. And then we can build from that, and we have to have the people on the ground that are willing to do that. Bring those people to us so that we can help them if that's what they want for Haiti. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Espaillat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. I know that very often we members of Congress like to exempt ourselves of any responsibilities and feel as though we haven't been complicit in any of this, and that the problem in the Caribbean and in Haiti sort of like surface from nothing. But the fact of the matter is that historically, we supported the dictatorship of Francois Duvalier. We supported the dictatorship of Rafael Trujillo Molina. And we have, up until now, also supported the colonial status of Puerto Rico. So, in fact, the crisis in the Caribbean is very much deep-rooted in what we have done as a country in that important part of the world, which is considered our fourth border, our third border. And so my question is the following. Given that the Miami Herald said that there are 500,000 illegal firearms circulating in Haiti, given that also the State Department cited that there's 286,000 children under the age of 15 working in what is considered domestic servitude, given that we just heard today that 41 police officers have been killed and 42 protesters have also been killed in the recent protests. Haiti is at the brink of disaster. My question to all of you, and I would like to get a yes or no answer from each of the panelists, do you feel that the return of the blue helmets will stabilize or will help to stabilize the situation while we work on broader reform that must come before an election is held? The answer from each of the members, yes or no. Do you feel that the blue helmets should be come back, Mr. Esperance? Yes or no? No? The answer is no? Thank you. Ms. Doyon?
No, we don't need this. What we need is systemic reform, and Haitians are able to handle this.
Yes or no, Mr. Erickson?
Not at this point.
Ms. Herman T?
No.
Mr. Garistasu?
No, not at this moment.
Okay, now I would like to, so all of you feel that the blue helmets, although they may have contributed to help some level of stability while they were there, you don't feel they should come back at this critical time. Okay, so who are the members, Mr. Esperance, who are the individuals leading the armed gangs? Could you name them?
Bon, écoutez, tellement gen gang armé jodia dans tout pays a, yo en pile, et puis fort dans gang sa yo, c'est autorité dans pouvoir qui ba aux armes et avec l'argent pour massacrer population.
Well, listen, there are so many armed gangs in Haiti.
Yeah, but who are the leaders? Could you name me the top 3 gang leaders? We should know them by name. We should be able to identify them.
Bon, par exemple, dans zone métropolitaine nan gen yon zone qui est village de Dieu, et non li les Anel Joseph.
For instance, Anel Joseph in the metropolitan area of Port-au-Prince.
Li entré dans prison récemment.
He recently was imprisoned.
Mais ou gon l'autre chef gang qui impliqué dans 5 massacres, c'est Jimmy Cherizier Barbecue qui a travaillé pour pouvoir.
You have Jimmy Cherizier Barbecue who has been implicated in the 5 massacres.
And the third one, please? So I can
Actually
move.
works for the government.
Okay.
Bon,
The
les
third
nous
one?
qui travaille pour le gouvernement, c'est lui-même, c'est pas un qui c'est pas officiel dans le gouvernement, mais c'est un monde que l'État utilisé, autorité utilisé, yo balsam, l'argent avec munitions pour massacrer population. Et il y a des gens dans le secteur privé à tout qui utilisent.
When we say that this is somebody who works for the government, it's not
Okay.
like he directly works for
I want the names, right? Now, let me go to Ms. DeYoung. You stated in your testimony that the president will not be able to complete his term in 2022. Why is that? Do you feel that that's totally impossible for him to complete his term? And what does that mean in real terms?
This means that the protests will keep on going because people are really dissatisfied with his ruling, and the economic situation has worsened under his term, and he hasn't taken any action to improve the situation. He has ruined any chance he has to have dialogue, and the movement now is not a movement between the opposition and the president. It's about accountability, and we, Petro challengers, we will not accept that this president represent us because it's a shame. He's indicted in corruption, and we don't believe he deserves to stay in power and rule by decree alone without a parliament and without a government in January.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Buck has
Chairman. I
another
yield back.
question. Congressman Levin? He does not have a question.
Merci un pile à tout témoignage pour paraître devant nous aujourd'hui. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Yoho, I thank you so much for holding this hearing and for the bipartisan engagement. It's really encouraging to me. And I can tell the witnesses and the audience that it's not going to be another 20 years before we have another hearing in this subcommittee under the leadership of Albio Ceres. We will pay close attention to this crisis and do everything we can to change things. I've really been struck by your testimony today. I think 25 years ago, I published a law review article that I think was read by 12 people. But the thesis of it was that the United States policy has failed in Haiti because we only deal with a tiny slice of the population who speak French, the elite, economic elite, and in fact, we call them civil society. And we have failed over many years to actually work with the broad groups of Haitian civil society, the neighborhood protection organizations, literacy organizations, the unions of teachers, whatever it is. The groups that, when he visited our country in the 19th century, Monsieur de Tocqueville said, were what set our country apart, not elections, but this effervescence of people organizing themselves. And so here today, Monsieur Espérance, Madame Doyen, Madame Hermantine, you basically all said that don't be obsessed with elections right now. We've had a lot of elections in Haiti, and they've failed to change things. Elections are constitutive of democracy, and we need them. But first, we need to work with the Haitian people in civil society to have accountability and have the rule of law. So let me start by asking Mr. Espérance to expand on. I was very troubled by your account of the status of the judiciary in Haiti. How endemic is the undermining of the independence of the judiciary, and what could we do to begin to change that?
Bon, pouvoir judiciaire, c'est un pouvoir, mais pouvoir exécutif là et pouvoir législatif là, ils ont traité pouvoir judiciaire comme un parent pauvre.
The judicial power is a power, but the executive branch and also the legislative branch consider the judicial branch as a poor parent.
Et pas gain suffisamment l'argent pour réforme faite dans l'appareil de justice là.
There's not enough funds, there's not enough money for the reforms that are needed in the judicial branch.
Par exemple, un moteur pouvoir judiciaire, c'est au niveau CSPJ qui c'est conseil pouvoir judiciaire, c'est inspection judiciaire.
The one thing that's important is the
Conseil supérieur pouvoir judiciaire, qui c'est organe indépendant pouvoir judiciaire.
Superior Council for the Judiciary, which is an independent body.
C'est inspection judiciaire.
It is the judicial inspection.
Il n'a pas existé.
It does not exist.
Il n'a pas de moyens.
It doesn't have the means.
Et un collègue, un congressman se dit là, et le gouvernement américain dépense billions de dollars en Haïti, mais justement, ils dépensent un paquet de copes dans la réforme judiciaire, mais le résultat, c'est zéro.
Well, indeed, as one of your colleagues, one of the congressmen just mentioned it, the United States spent billions of dollars in Haiti, but the results so far have been zero. There's no.
For this body.
Ils dépensent un pile pour la réforme judiciaire.
They spent a lot of money for judicial reform.
C'est parce que le programme gouvernement américain à travers USAID, ils n'ont pas travaillé avec acteurs haïtiens, ils n'ont pas consulté l'organisation dans la société.
Well, the problem is the USAID and US organizations, when they try to come up with these programs, they don't work with the actors on the ground. They don't work with the people they should work with.
Dans le moment qui n'a parlé là, le gouvernement américain a un gros programme dans la question de réforme judiciaire.
As we're speaking right now, the US government has a big program when it comes to judicial reform.
Et pendant ce temps, le système n'a pas plus mal.
Meanwhile, the system has worsened.
Donc, ça nous besoin et des autorités qui respectent et institutions pour que institutions soient capables de jouer un rôle avec toute indépendance.
What we need is authorities who respect the judicial branch, so the branch itself can play its role as it's supposed to.
Moi, j'ai milité dans la question de droit monde plus passé 30 ans.
It's been more than 30 years that I've been working on human rights issues.
Ça n'a vivre en Haïti là journée aujourd'hui depuis environ 3 ans, nous pas jamais vivre situation ça.
We have never gone through that situation that we're going through now for the past 3 years. We've never.
It's never been this bad as in the last 30. All right, my time's expired. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to hang out in the hopes that I might get to ask some more questions when everyone else is tired. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Congressman Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I'd be glad to yield to my friend for a couple of minutes if you'd like to ask more questions right now. Okay, and then I will yield to Mr. Yoho from Florida.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Mr. Yan, you were getting ready to say something when we were talking about before, and I want to we know how much money we've put in there, and for Haiti to have less than 20% of the population not have running water in the 21st century in the Western Hemisphere, I cannot comprehend that. And so I want you to go ahead and answer what you were going to answer before, and then let's talk about how do we fix this and make a significant impact so we don't have this hearing next year and say, USAID dropped some more food here, and thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to add something about the judiciary system. The judiciary system is crippled by corruption like all the other institutions, and it is not working for the people. On a recent trip in Paris, the president said that he had to hire 50 corrupted judges in the judiciary system. This is an example of how severe the situation is when a president confessed to hiring corrupt judges. So no one can trust the judiciary system to serve the people. We only believe the judiciary system will protect the interests of those in power. About the fact that most people do not have potable water in Haiti, this is a serious problem, and it is another example of how people go to election just to have state resources, to live a lavish lifestyle, to share privilege with their friends, with their entourage, and not serve the people.
Okay, let me interrupt you there. How do we change that? How do we get rule of law and respect for rule of law?
The way to do that is to actually foster systemic reform so that competent people and honest people can go to election and run the country.
All right, so how do you get rid of the corruption that prevents that?
One of the ways to get rid of it is to show that, like for example, we're asking for a Petro-Caribe trial. In the past, no one has faced charges for corruption. And the accountability movement, we want
Is there a political will in the people that are in government to carry that out? Are they willing to do that, or are they afraid and intimidated to?
They don't want to do that because so many high-level officials are indicted in corruption. Their names are in the reports. They want to protect themselves, so they don't want this to happen.
If they don't want to, how can you change that?
This is why we want the president to resign, because himself is indicted in corruption, and we want to have a transitional government which will handle the Petro-Caribe trial.
In your opinion, if you have a transitional government, if he steps down, what guarantees or what certainty do you have that you're going to have somebody that's going to really put the people of Haiti first?
We have this guarantee because of the accountability movement. Years ago, people like me, we were not on the street protesting for corruption. We are tired. We have had enough.
I would think so. I see my 3 colleagues in the back, they're smiling, so they must be happy with what I'm asking, or they don't think it's going to happen. And
it will happen because I don't think Haitians are ready to support any corrupt officials anymore. We've had enough. We've seen that it doesn't work, and that's why we are asking for.
But when you have
changes.
people in control that are corrupt, they're going to suppress you, right?
They're trying to suppress the movement.
I think they've been doing it since I was a little kid, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, because we've seen what's happened since the 60s. The people of Haiti deserve to have the freedom and liberties that we have, that we believe in. We're all born with that innate quality. And if we don't change, and I want to talk to you, Mr. Erickson, you brought up the UN. UN was there, what, for 12 years? Now they're small. How effective were they, and what results can we say, all right, the UN was here, they did this, and look at the great results? Obviously, it's not water or sewers.
Yes, you're absolutely right, Congressman. So the UN was present in Haiti beginning in 2004. They came in the middle of another crisis when President Aristide was ousted, and then remained through the period of the earthquake and really drew back the peacekeeping mission substantially in 2017 and transitioned to a political office in 2019. The legacy of the UN in Haiti is very mixed. Clearly, there was success in maintaining the peace during that time, because Haiti did not have this widespread social civic breakdown that's taken place in the last couple of years. And there is a Haitian National Police, which Mr. Esperance referred to, which has become a more positive force, more accountable. It's bigger. There's about 5,000.
I'm going to run out of time here in 3 seconds.
There was 5,000 police in Haiti in 2010. Today there's 15,000.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Koratsu,
Chris.
you mentioned that in your remarks that you believe that Haiti is a national security concern for the United States. How do you mean that?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Castro. Well, its proximity to the U.S., being so close to my home state of Florida, its geopolitical implications, as I had mentioned, the fact that they maintain a partnership with Taiwan is something to really consider, because it is forcing China to keep away from our borders, which is very important right now. The Dominican Republic is working closely with China. El Salvador is just now working closely with China. Panama is working closely with China. And China is really all over Haiti, trying to dabble and trying to get them towards their sphere. So that's something very important to consider. And also here and multilaterally, it's also very important that Haiti, for the past several years, has always sided with CARICOM, with the regional bloc, and it's now taken a stance against Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, so something to consider. And they've also taken a stronger stance against the authoritarian government of Ortega in Nicaragua.
Sure. So I guess your comment was geopolitical in nature.
It's geopolitically and strategically correct.
Sure. No,
Yes,
and
sir.
I understand. I just think that, you know, in the past, we've seen migration from Haiti, folks seeking refuge and asylum in the United States. And oftentimes, when we receive people from nations like Haiti or Mexico or in Central America, there's a language that develops around those people that can be harmful to the way Americans think about who these people are. We see it with Central American migrants now, where there is an effort, and I'm not including you in that, I'm just saying, there is an effort to try to make these people out to be dangerous or people that we should be feared, that we should fear. And again, I'm not saying that's your intention. But you know, Haiti has dealt in the past with what I would consider bad U.S. foreign policy posture, also leaders who didn't serve the people of Haiti but served themselves, and also natural disasters, the most recent of which, the 2010 earthquake that the country, I mean, they lost somewhere between 100,000, maybe 250,000 people that they're still trying to rebuild from. And so I ask that, and I certainly respect your answer on the geopolitics and the significance and the challenge that China poses in the Caribbean and Latin America. But I also want us to be mindful that when people, whether in the past or in the future, seek asylum here, that most of all they're coming in desperation, oftentimes oppression, and are not dangerous people in and of themselves.
Oh, yes, sir. And coming from the state of Florida, I think I have a unique perspective on that. My family is Cuban-American.
Sure.
So they've been here since 1960 and really have contributed to what South Florida is today. Growing up with Haitians, with Venezuelans, with Mexicans, I know the positive impact that they can have on the community. And I think I'm also one of those prospects. My family worked really hard, and I'm sitting before Congress today, which is very cool. But understand, there needs to be a change of narrative as well as the positive aspects of what they're doing. For example, what's going on in Venezuela and Colombia with the migration crisis. Venezuelans are really putting forth a lot in that community, so we need to really speak about that positive aspect as well. It's not just negative, and the contributions they can make to society.
Yeah. Thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
Congressman Smith.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Yoho, for calling this very important hearing. Thank you for your testimonies. Let me just focus for a moment on the issue of anti-human trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking. More than a decade ago, I met with a woman named Nancy Rivard, an airline flight attendant with American Airlines, and she and others recognized, coming out of Haiti, that there were a number of children who were basically unaccompanied, but except by some guy that just did not look like there was a relationship whatsoever, and contacted law enforcement, and lo and behold, they found out there was a trafficking ring, a pedophile ring of huge proportions. Over 60 children have been trafficked. When they got law enforcement involved, they were able to stop it, or make arrests, but the 60-plus kids that had been so horribly mistreated were still lost into a terrible system. I actually wrote a law, the Frederick Douglass Act, that was signed into law earlier this year on anti-human trafficking. I also wrote the original Trafficking Victims Protection Act. But the Douglass Act has specific language in it, and it was born out of what we learned from Nancy Rivard and others, that gives prioritization to U.S. use of airlines for federal employees if they have a protocol in place to spot trafficking, to be situationally aware. So I would like to ask you, if you could, where are we in terms of the Haitian government and its record? You know, the TIP report this year upgraded Haiti to Tier 2. It had been much worse off for years. They do have a new national plan, as you know, that's in effect. Although the recommendations from our Trafficking in Persons office is that they prioritize that national plan. They underscore the fact that there needs to be the training of police, prosecutors, judges, that there's a great deal of non-information, misinformation about the nature of trafficking, so it's not prioritized by law enforcement. Even training of labor investigators so that they can look for labor trafficking both in Haiti and those that are sent elsewhere. If you could speak to the issue of trafficking, whoever might want to take it, or several of you, is Haiti moving in the right direction? The TIP report suggests yes, but they're nowhere near where they ought to be to protect the children of Haiti, as well as women and others who are exploited.
I know that efforts has been made to tackle this issue, but I'll say that this is all part of a bigger problem, which is impunity, weakness of law enforcement, and worsening economic condition. And to solve this problem, we need to get to the root cause and prevent officials from diverting money that is meant to fight poverty and allow parents to have the resources to raise their kids so they won't be that exposed to human trafficking. Thank you.
From the perspective of the Haitian American community in Miami, for example, we know neighborhood-based organizations such as the one I work with, that there are a lot of young people who are living in deplorable conditions within households in the Haitian community. These are the children who migrated, who were sent by parents, again, because of the economic situation. They were sent to go fend for themselves and take care of their families back home. But these young people, in a semi-state of servitude, you know, thank God they go to school, but they live in really horrible conditions at home, and social service agencies try their best to attend to their needs because this is sort of the route to gang activity in, you know, urban centers in Miami. So we do notice that there are such situations. It's clearly documented, but we have no power over what happens in Haiti.
Yes. Tout problème ça yo trafic timon yo lié avec absence état de droit et impunité qui institutionnalisée en dans pays.
All this issue of human trafficking, it correlates with the absence of the rule of law.
Jodia état de droit. Jodia et en Haïti, la vie monde pas aucune importance pour autorité yo.
Today in Haiti, human life doesn't have any importance for the authorities.
Ça nous besoin un l'État qui fort côté institution yo a marché et a fait travail yo avec toute indépendance yo.
What we need is a strong state where all the institutions are working and they are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, like a well-heeled machine.
Et je dis a pas aucune volonté bon côté autorité yo pour adresser problème ça yo pour résoudre problème ça yo.
There is no will on the side of the authorities to address these issues and to resolve them.
Et même si président Jovenel t'a fait mandat il était sous pouvoir jusqu'à février 2022, mais pas 1% chance pour faire élection en Haïti avec président Jovenel.
Even if the current president Jovenel had the opportunity to finish his term, and then by 2022, there is no opportunity to really have elections with them.
Ça veut dire que Haïti pour aller en transition quand même.
In other words, Haiti will have to go through a transition no matter what.
Nous souhaitons que dans la transition ça, il n'y a pas de tout problème, problème impunité, problème état de droit, problème corruption.
And so during that transition, we'll be able to address all those issues: impunity, the question of the rule of law, and so forth.
Mr. Esperance, thank you very much. Thank you all for your. I think my time is up.
Congressman Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Yoho for calling this hearing, and welcome to our witnesses. Bonjour et bienvenue. The failures of the Haitian political system have been well documented, not just for generations, but literally over 2 centuries, I think it's fair to say. And we have a tendency to try to treat symptoms and not address underlying disease. I think that underlying disease is surely corruption, as we've spoken about briefly today. So I'd like to start with that. Ms. Douillon, you spoke briefly about it, but I'd like some specifics about how the United States of America can use its resources, both financial and human, to start taking steps to improve governance, restore the faith and trust in government, and address the underlying disease.
Thank you. If the U.S. wants to support a sustainable way forward, like I said, it may take its lead from the Haitian civil society. You mentioned it, we're treating the symptom, we're not going to the root, to the cause of the problem. And now the problem is that we want to fight corruption and get rid of corrupt officials. And the steps are get this government to resign, have the Petro-Caribbean trial, make reform.
Well, let's back. So step 1 is getting the government to resign.
Yes, because there is no way a corrupt president can do any good for this country except protecting himself.
So working with Moïse and his government is a non-starter.
It's morally impossible as well. And
Number
we need
2?
to get a trial, and we need to get constitutional reform, change in the electoral system so we can have fair and open election.
And how, let's stop there for a moment. How do we
Yes.
begin that initiative?
With a transitional government, with a clear mandate. There are actually civil society organizations who are working on a roadmap for the transitional government, and there is a general consensus on what this transitional government should do. And the priorities are the trial and elections, fair, open election with a new electoral system, a new electoral council, because the one we have now can't organize election. It doesn't respect the legal rule, and I think its term is over as well. Therefore, we need those basic changes so we can have honest people, competent people to run for office and enter a new system. We need systemic reforms, and we definitely need it now.
Do you see, is anything that the United States is doing right now affecting any of those 3 initiatives?
Stop supporting the Moïse government, because the way it is, the U.S. government is encouraging dialogue, and it doesn't work. There is no way we can have dialogue with a corrupt president who has won any chances he had to have dialogue, even when it wasn't about his resignation. He won it. The United States is pushing to the formation of a new government. It won't work. We can ask people to enter a government with a corrupt president and guide it in corruption. There is no way we can ask people to do that. And he had a chance with a prime minister from the opposition, Mr. Sayan, and he won it. So he had 2 governments, and it didn't work. He had the majority in the parliament, yet he couldn't form a government. There is no way we can trust him to handle anything.
Okay, I appreciate it. Mr. Erickson, I'd like to talk about our diplomacy in Haiti. Are staff drawdowns and affecting, as I presume the answer is yes, our ability to affect diplomacy and do our business, if you will, in Haiti?
The U.S. Embassy in Haiti is functioning in an extremely challenging environment in terms of security. In terms of the staff footprint, I don't know if there have been many changes, but there have been periods where people have, for example, not been able to have their family members there with them. And then, I would just say in general, there's been fewer visitors. There have been a few high-level visitors recently, but you're not seeing perhaps the level of diplomatic attention from Washington either.
And what would that level of diplomatic attention look like in a perfect world?
Sure. Well, one of the proposals that I made in my testimony is to have the Secretary of State convene in the first quarter of next year all of the key international actors engaged with Haiti, which is known as the Haiti Core Group, which includes countries from Europe, Latin America, Canada, and international institutions, to try to lay out what a framework would be for the international community to help assist with a political solution and also address the humanitarian needs.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. Congressman Vargas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho. In fact, Mr. Yoho said that we have to respect the rule of law. We have to have the rule of law, and are we willing to carry it out? So this Saturday, my oldest daughter and I, we drove to Tijuana, to the area called El Chaparral, where people present themselves for asylum. Now, the law is such that a person fleeing for persecution should be able to go up to the American side of the border, present themselves, and then ultimately have their case adjudicated to see if they have legitimate fear to be able to then gain asylum and stay in the United States. Now, there are a number of people that were there, and there's this queuing system that prevents people from actually doing that. So you physically, literally can't get to the American side of the border and ask for that because you're prevented from doing that by this fence that has been put up by the Mexican government in conjunction with the American government. The American government, we only allow a few people. In fact, there's this book that they have, and they only call a few people from it. And there was this beautiful couple that turned out to be from Haiti. It was a husband, a wife, and a little girl. And I couldn't help but thinking at this time of the year of another family 2,000 years ago that was looking for refuge. I think had a great case. I think here also, but never even had the opportunity. In fact, there was someone there, thankfully, that was able to explain to him, you have to put your name on this list, and maybe 6 months down the line or 4 months down the line, your name will be called. You have to come here to hear your name. Then you can apply for asylum. Well, we should follow our own law. We should be willing to respect the rule of law. We should have had that family should have had the opportunity to present themselves and make their case for asylum. Under the conditions that you're talking about today, I think that family would have made a great case to say, we fear for our lives, we fear for our livelihood, we feel for the child that we have with us here, and be able to stay in the United States under our law. But we're not willing to do that. So when we hear about this notion that people should be able to follow the rule of law and we should respect the rule of law, we should begin by respecting our own rules, our own laws, and allowing that little family to be able to present themselves appropriately as they wanted to. They didn't even know it. Now, again, it gets more complicated because they didn't speak Spanish, they didn't speak English. So they didn't even know how to do this when they showed up. So again, I think we should respect the rule of law. That being said, I am very much in favor, of course, of us providing greater assistance to Haiti. We have to do that. I'm in favor of that. I know there's corruption, and there's a lot of other things. There always is in the world. But at the same time, we should respect our own laws, our own rules, because we know that this is going to happen around the world. That's why we've always been a refuge for people seeking this type of help, this type of asylum. That's how most of the people probably in this room got here. And so again, we should respect our own rule of law. We should respect our own rules and give an opportunity. We should look at that, Mr. Chairman. There's a grave injustice happening along the border, especially for people that don't speak Spanish or English. And I have to say, too, my daughter, the reason she was with me, she works at Casa Cornelia, which attempts to get asylum for people that arrive and began with girls and women and now families that have been trafficked and now they're seeking asylum. And in particular, I think people of African descent get discriminated against. They're coming through a nation that's Mexican, obviously, that speaks Spanish. And oftentimes they don't know the language, Cameroonians especially in particular. But we should respect our own rule of law. So again, I'm very much in favor of us helping Haiti, and I'm here to listen. But at the same time, I'm also here to say we're not doing it. You know, we're very good to cast aspersions on other countries. They should follow the rule of law. We don't do it. We don't follow international law. We don't follow our own rules. Anyway, Mr. Erickson, what do you think about it? I mean, don't you think the conditions exist there to be able to apply for asylum here for some people, the legitimate reason?
Yes, I do. And I really appreciate your commentary and observations. One of the recommendations that I made in my testimony was the extension of temporary protected status for Haitians in the United States past the current 2021 expiration date, and the examination of possibilities for humanitarian parole for needy Haitians or political asylum for those whose lives are at serious risk.
And I hope we do it. My time has expired here, but again, I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity.
Congressman Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this very important hearing today, and I thank all of the panelists for being there. And my colleagues, as you may know, yesterday, myself and 8 other members of Congress, many of whom are sitting on the dais today, wrote to Secretary Pompeo and Administrator Green to express our deep concern regarding the prolonged political and humanitarian crises in Haiti. We know that people are dying on a daily basis, either some because of no food, others because of the violence that has taken place. And what we were trying to find out, and according to the State Department, U.S. policy toward Port-au-Prince focuses, they tell me, on strengthening institutions and infrastructure for sustainable development and democratic foundations and poverty alleviation. So that's what we were told by the State Department. So my question would be then to you initially, since most of you and all of you have been on the ground and looking, just to ask you, what is the perception among Haitians of the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. assistance to Haiti? Yes.
The perception is that the U.S. Embassy is supporting the president, and the president makes everything he can to show that he has the strong support of the U.S. Embassy and the U.S. government. And we believe that the answer from the embassy to the Petro-Caribbean movement, for example, is not as strong as it should be. It's the very first time that there is a strong accountability movement in the country, and it doesn't receive the recognition it should. The response is better on the human rights side because they condemn the La Saline massacre and all, but they've been mainly calling for dialogue, which I mentioned before is not possible. They have been calling for the formation of a new government, which people do not believe is the solution because the president is corrupt and all the people he appointed before have like corruption suspicion upon them. And they've been calling for election, but I think my colleague mentioned it before, we have the Dermalog scandal related to the identification card, the voter cards. It didn't respect the rule, it didn't have the validation from the Court of Auditors, and it doesn't help to promote election with a government that is using illegal card basically to have this election. And it seems that they are pushing for election either way, whether it's fair election or not. It's like we're promoting, the US is supporting democracy, but not democracy itself, but sign of democracy. As long as we have a government, no matter the way it was formed, no matter the type of people in this government, it's democracy. No matter the kind of election we have, as long as we have an election to prove that we are respecting democracy, it's okay. But we are tired of this, and we believe we should not keep going this way because we deserve better.
It's your feeling that there should not be any cooperation with the Morse government because they could not have a fair and democratic election? And I just want to check to make sure that everybody on the panel feels the same way. Do they think that is accurate? Or is there any way, to engage but make sure that we do have a fair and impartial election?
Well, Thank you. The idea of fair and democratic elections also a construct that is not necessarily well implemented in Haiti. Let's look at how these elections are funded. How are individuals incentivized to run for office, to create parties? I mean, before elections, you have parties just pop up out of nowhere because people know that elections will come with funding. Each party, if I'm wrong, please let me know, each person or each party that presents candidates will receive some funding from the international community. So this obsession with, the electoral process, one man, one vote elections has created a cottage industry of bogus parties that come up and that attract not the most civic-minded people to come and run. So when we have elections where we have 75 individuals representing 75 parties running for office, someone should say, what is wrong with this picture? What monster have we created, all in the name of quote-unquote democracy? And so the incentivization of politics or elections has sort of created this monster that attracts sometimes the worst elements that we have to offer. So the idea that you have elections and that's proof that democracy is healthy in Haiti is not really accurate. So you can't say that, well, we have elections, so everything should be okay. Why can't you attract the right people? The process itself attracts the wrong people.
And if I may add something.
Thank you. We have 4 other guests. Congresswoman Frederica Wilson from Florida.
Thank you, Chairman Sears, and thank you for holding this hearing. This is long overdue. And I'm pleased to have my constituent and Haitian community leader, Leonie Hermanton, testify today. And I asked you to invite her to testify at this hearing because my district is home to one of the nation's largest Haitian communities, which I've had the privilege of representing in Congress and in the Florida legislature. In October, Leonie and other Haitian community leaders joined Speaker Pelosi and me for a roundtable on Haiti. And one of those panelists, Attorney Karen Andre, who worked in the Obama administration, is in the audience. Raise your hand, Karen. Generations of Haitians passionately expressed their heartfelt concerns about the ongoing crisis. They were livid. They made it abundantly clear that Haiti's sovereignty and right to self-determination must not be undermined. They also shared concerns about the Trump administration's continued support for President Moïse and inadequate calls for accountability for the myriad of grievances that have compelled Haitians to take to the streets and march and protest. We can't remain silent when there's credible allegations of corruption, human rights abuses, and other atrocities. We can't remain silent when thousands of ambitious Haitian children, especially young girls, are unable to access an education, which is their only ladder of opportunity. And we can't remain silent when more than 3 million Haitians are facing a hunger crisis. We must speak up and we must listen. That's why today's hearing is so important and so timely. We've had the opportunity to hear directly from Haitians who are living in Haiti and in the diaspora, and united in fighting for a stronger, more prosperous Haiti. Their testimonies have given us valuable insight about the impact of U.S. policies on Haiti. And the Miami Herald editorial board said that we must invest in Haiti. The international community must invest in Haiti. We have to do something and not just listen. I heard Mr. Erickson, and we need to listen, direct, and we need to act. I hope this is just the first of many congressional hearings on Haiti. For too long, there have been no hearings on Haiti. Thank you, Chairman Sears, for listening to us and engaging. Ms. Hamilton, thank you for traveling from Miami and for your continued leadership in the Haitian community. You portrayed the Haitian diaspora as an underutilized asset and recommended that the U.S. work in partnership with the Haitians locally and diaspora experts as opposed to the big international development organizations. How should USAID and other U.S. agencies demonstratively leverage the expertise of the Haitian diaspora to maximize the effectiveness of U.S. investments in Haiti? And what do you consider as a suitable mechanism to facilitate this kind of partnership that you envision?
Thank you for the question. You know, I often dread talking about USAID from the diaspora's perspective because we have seldomly seen a willingness to fully engage the Haitian diaspora. You know, we, as I said, invest $3.1 billion in Haiti, and yet we are never invited as partners, as investors around the table when it comes to creating programs that target us. There was a program right after the earthquake called the Haitian Diaspora Marketplace. It was a two-year program, and its goal was to provide financial and technical assistance to members of the Haitian diaspora. But, you know, it was led from a bank in Haiti, and it was supposed to give technical assistance to people who live in the United States. So it really did not make too much sense, and it really did not work it was not very successful. There was another effort called LEAD. Again, its goal was to attract investment in small and medium-sized enterprises based in Haiti, but it was implemented by one of these large organizations, again, that did not successfully engage us. You know, the idea is, you know, you pay lots of lip service to programs engaging the diaspora, but if you don't engage us, if you don't come to find us and talk to us, it's not going to work. So
thank you. Thank you. Can I just get to the other member? I know they've been waiting long. Congresswoman Lee.
Sorry.
Well, first, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. I am formerly a member for many years of this committee, the full committee and subcommittee, so thank you so much for inviting us back to be here with you. Once again, I just have to say my heart continues to ache for the people of Haiti, and I want to associate myself with many of the remarks that have been made today. Now, for many years, myself personally, since the 70s, I have worked in a variety of ways to support the Haitian people and have, of course, visited Haiti many times prior to my being a member of Congress and now as serving as a member of Congress. And let me just frame this within a couple of perspectives. I'm vice chair of the subcommittee that funds all of our foreign aid, USAID, so thank you for your response on the question from Congresswoman Wilson. But we've helped spearhead and guide the humanitarian U.S. assistance efforts after the deadly earthquake. We've worked to improve and strengthen health care. We've supported efforts to strengthen governance, and we've always stood to protect the human rights of the Haitian people. We've ensured funding for emergency assistance through USAID, ensuring that that's available, and we included important language in the appropriations bill requiring a report on the La Saline massacre, including the human rights abuses. We've also required our government to condition funding for the central government of Haiti on human rights abuses and governance issues. The ongoing political and economic crisis in Haiti has led to, we all know, as you have said, a food crisis. Schools and businesses are being shut down for weeks, vital resources becoming scarce. I share that because there are many, many efforts that all of us have been mounted in, and still we see what is taking place in Haiti, and in many ways it appears to be a failed state. Now, I'm one to believe that the U.S. role has not been a very positive role, laying out everything I just laid out and more, because of the structural issues and because of our history of undermining, in many respects, the Haitian people. in terms of their freedom, their liberation, and the empowerment of the Haitian people. I know for a fact that a lot of the USAID money has gone to NGOs that are not Haitian NGOs. None of the Haitian businesses in the diaspora have, as you said, have been brought to the table. And so I'm wondering, first of all, what do you think we can do here as members of Congress, in addition to what we've done, to address the structural issues and to make sure that the United States becomes a positive actor in this? And then secondly, as it relates to the incidences, the massacre really in La Saline, what's the status of that? Has anyone been brought to justice? Has anyone been prosecuted in that massacre?
J'aimerais te dire au commencement, tout crime financier ou bien massacre que l'autorité est impliquée, gouvernement exécutif a bloqué tout dossier ça dans l'appareil de justice là.
Like I mentioned earlier, all financial crimes or other. Like I mentioned earlier, all financial crimes or other kinds of crimes that have been committed, the Haitian government has blocked the kinds of investigation at the judicial level.
Ça veut dire un dossier La Saline qui devant la justice depuis commencement année a pas gain aucun mandat qui décerné contre monde qui impliqué dans crime nan et criminel yo a circuler librement.
In other words, if you consider the file on the La Saline massacre, there hasn't been any indictment that has been issued. And the criminals are going about their business without any problem.
Yon a gang Jimmy Cherizier alias Barbecue que autorité yo utilisé pour faire massacre ça, li continue impliqué dans d'autres massacres dans le pays.
One of the gangs with Jimmy Cherizier that was involved in that massacre is continuing to act the same way in other massacres.
T'allais à une question qui t'est posée sur qui Jean et Haïtien yo ouais et ambassade américaine en Haïti.
Earlier, the question was asked about the Haitian perception of the U.S. Embassy in Haiti.
Jusqu'à sorti 2017 pour arriver jusqu'à mois de mars et année ça et nous capable dire autorité américaine yo via ambassade là te bail un support sans condition avec autorité haïtienne yo.
We can say from 2017 up until March 2019, U.S. authorities have given unquestionable support to the Haitian authorities.
Avec l'aide et 104 congressmen te fait sorti côté que yo te voye bail congrès américain dans mois de mars année ça.
With the letter signed by 104 congressmen that was delivered in March of this year.
Et ambassade là
to the embassy?
Ambassade là commence à changer sur quelques dossiers.
The embassy has begun to shift, to modify it in some of those files.
Tant que La Saline.
For instance, La Saline.
Et faut que nous dit journée jodi a autorité américaine yo y a fait un pile pression et pour sous monde qui a manifesté et sous opposant contre opposant pouvoir.
U.S. authorities are putting a lot of pressure against a lot of people who are demonstrating against the power, the government in power.
Yo retiré visa en pile là-dedans yo.
They cancel a lot of the visa of many of them.
Et yo font pilote pression sur yo.
And they also apply a lot of pressure on them.
Pendant ce temps, autorité dans pouvoir qui n'a blanchiment l'argent sous territoire américain et dans question crime et financier violation de droits monde.
In the meantime, the Haitian authorities who are involved in money laundering,
Yo protégé yo.
They are being protected.
Yo pas jamais fait rien.
They never do anything.
Yo pas prendre aucune sanction contre yo.
There was no sanction against them.
Et récemment, l'OEA avec le gouvernement haïtien et lancé un programme qui va renforcer l'institution l'État dans la bataille contre la corruption.
Recently, the OAS and the government have come up with a program to try and clean up corruption within the government.
Thank you, Congresswoman Presley.
Pas fini.
C'est comme ça. C'est comme ça.
30 secondes.
All right, go ahead, finish up.
Et si l'autorité américaine mette si le gouvernement américain mette cob dans le programme, c'est pour gaspiller l'argent.
If the U.S. government puts its money in that program, it's going to be a waste. It's going to be wasting money.
C'est vrai, il y a besoin de renforcer l'institution qui bataille contre la corruption.
It is true that they want to reinforce the institutions that are fighting against corruption.
Mais il faut qu'on fasse avec autorité qui ne pas corrompue.
But you have to do it with authorities, with people who are not corrupt,
Avec autorité qui ne pas craser l'institution.
with authorities that are not destroying
Tant que l'autorité
institutions,
ça a fait journée aujourd'hui.
like the current authorities are doing right now.
Thank you. I don't mean to cut you off, but we have other members that have been waiting for long. Congresswoman Presley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for waving me on to the committee for this critically important conversation today. I am here for two reasons. One, in my official capacity as the Congresswoman representing the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District, proudly, which boasts the third largest population of the Haitian diaspora in the country. But I am also here, if I'm being fully authentic, as a Black woman in gratitude. A parent is a child's first teacher. My mother did not read me nursery rhymes, but she made sure early on that I knew the words of Toussaint Louverture. I was born a slave, but nature gave me the soul of a free man. The people of Haiti inspired me in my lifetime of work to fight against colonialism and for the liberation and freedom of Black people and all people around the globe. And I thank you for that role. I also proudly boast the only pre-K dual language program in the country in the Toussaint Louverture Academy, and finally, trailblazing, historic Haitian-American leaders like Maurice St. Fleur and Linda Decina Forey, Jean Bradley Darencourt, and Gurley Adrian, elected more recently. So what is happening in Haiti is of specific and urgent import to the people that I represent, dealing with the fact that they cannot travel back to the funerals of their loved ones due to the violence, the fact that students cannot go to school, that hospitals do not have enough oxygen for critically ill patients seeking care. Just last month, I held a roundtable with Haitian stakeholders in my district to hear directly from them about how the violence has impacted their families and how the U.S. can play a role in helping to forge a path for long-term peace and stability for the people of Haiti. They stressed the need for security measures to keep their loved ones in Haiti safe and strong accountability measures to prevent fraud and to hold bad actors to account. Some of my line of questioning has already been asked, so I'm going to just lift up a couple of things with the time that I have remaining. So the first is, can you speak to how was the closing of the USCIS field office in Port-au-Prince affected the situation in Haiti? Anyone who would like to comment on that?
Programme ça, pas quoi c'était un programme qui était recevoir en pile et haïtien parce que c'était un programme qui était là et surtout pour aider famille monde qui appliquait pour asile politique aux États-Unis et pour faire entrer famille après.
I'm not sure this program really helped a lot of Haitians. It was a program that was established to help people who were applying for political asylum and also to bring the family members.
Okay.
Et jodia nous pas gagné en pile haïtien qui joignent asile politique aux États-Unis parce que yon ça administration américaine n'a fait tout programme asile politique yo fait un paquet de temps passé ça a pris 4 ans 3 ans avant une interview.
There's not a lot of people who apply nowadays for political asylum because what the U.S. government has done is make it so that it takes much longer, like 3 years, 4 years, before you actually get even an interview.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then, did you want to elaborate?
I want to add
Before I go to
something,
Ms.
but not exactly related to your question, but related to the introduction you made. And you are really, my friends, my colleague in the Petro Challenge movement, the movement for accountability, we follow you closely in Haiti, and we are inspired by those women in Congress here in the United States. And one of our concerns is that in Haiti, we can't do the same. And women can't run for office as easily as it is done elsewhere, because to run an election in Haiti, you need support from gang, and you need dirty money. And here I will take the opportunity to say this is also one of the reasons we are having this movement, because in the future, we would like to see people like you playing this role, taking role in parliament and help the country, just like you're doing it here.
Very humbling, thank you. To that point, are there any leaders of the opposition that you could name, and could you speak to how a transitional government could actually, how do we ensure that that doesn't contribute to the chaos and actually does get Haiti on a pathway to peace?
I think the first way would be to ensure that civil society play a really strong role instead of dealing with the crisis as a crisis between the president and the opposition, because the youth, the people from the accountability movement, we don't believe that all those politicians who want the president to resign are actually fit to replace him or to be in charge of the country. We want to take the process really seriously and have a vetting. We don't want any corrupt official, whether it's from the opposition or from the government party, to be in place, and we think that society, the youth, the petro challengers has to play a key role if we want to move forward and avoid chaos. We don't want chaos. We don't want opponents to just replace the president. It's not about taking power and just keep minding their own business. It's about changing our country. It's about doing something new. It's about finally taking Haiti away from this mess, if I can say it this way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Talking about strong women, Congresswoman Waters.
Thank you very much. First, allow me to thank my colleague, Chairman Albios Harris, for organizing this hearing entitled Haiti on the Brink, Assessing U.S. Policy Toward a Country in Crisis, and for inviting me to participate. Haiti is indeed a country in crisis, and we're long overdue for an honest assessment of the policies of the United States towards Haiti as this crisis has developed. In April of this year, I led a delegation to Haiti, which met with residents of the La Saline neighborhood of Haiti's capital and surrounding areas who described acts of unconscionable violence that occurred in November of 2018. The La Saline massacre resulted in the deaths of at least 71 civilians, in addition to the rape of at least 11 women and the looting of more than 150 homes. Survivors expressed concern that government-connected gangs working with police officers carried out the attacks to punish La Saline for participation in anti-government protests. Now, what are these protests all about? We cannot escape dealing with the reality of why people are in the street. And I have to disclose that I have supported Haiti in so many ways for so many years, and I'm a big supporter still of Lavalas. President Aristide is not involved in this. He has a university that's doing fine, but these massive demonstrations must be talked about in realistic ways. These protests were sparked by the disappearance of millions of dollars of assistance provided to Haiti by Venezuela under the Petro-Carib program. Through Petro-Carib, Venezuela sold oil to Haiti and allowed them to defer the payments for up to 25 years and pay a low rate of interest on the debt. Haiti, as supposed to sell the oil and use the money to pay for social programs. Instead, at least $2 billion went missing. That's almost a quarter of Haiti's total economy for 2017. A government report delivered to Haitian Senate by official auditors on May 31st highlighted the corruption. Haitians began demonstrating against the government because they knew they never saw the benefits of Petro-Carib program. Now, having said that, our government tends to support whomever is the president, whoever is the leader of Haiti, no matter what. I've been through this, through so many presidents, starting with Papa Doc and Baby Doc, Preval, Martelly, Latouret, and now Moise. I don't know why this president cannot be responsible, along with Martelly, for the accountability of the Petrocarib money. The demonstrations are not going to stop. And for those who go down there and who send messages, everybody ought to get together, and they need to come together, and they need to talk about this, there's not going to be any talk. The demonstrations are going to go on until this president either comes forward and gives some accountability for what has happened to this money, and he can bring Martelly along with him, because you all sitting there know what's going on. In addition to that, if he cannot do that, they're going to demand that he steps down. Now, we understand Haiti is a sovereign nation. We can't tell it what to do, but the United States and USAID and everybody that's holding up Moise and Martelly and others who are responsible for this money need to come out and talk about this issue. Ladies and gentlemen, the problems is governance. You know, people like to take food, and they like to take clothing, and they like to support these non-government agencies, but that's not what we ought to be doing. We ought to be doing everything that we can to call for accountability. I want to tell you, again, I've been through all of this. I love Haiti. I support it. I know that governance is needed. And don't forget, I've been through when President Aristide was exiled twice, and Clinton got him back once, and then the last time he came back, I went and got him in the Central Africa Republic. We rented a plane and went up and brought him back. And he stayed in Africa until he came back. When Baby Doc came back, he came back. So we know this history, and we know the history of everybody taking advantage of Haiti whenever they have the opportunity to. So what we need to do is put pressure on the president. The president has not came out. He's not talked about what is going on. He's not tried to answer anybody. All that he has done, in my estimation, is been responsible for some of the violence as he tried to quiet the people of Les Salines. And many of them are Lavalas. Not all of them, but many of them are. And I support the idea that they can demand from this president and this government accountability. So having said all of that, we should stand ready to support whatever needs to be done for a transitional government, whatever needs to be done for elections. There is no judiciary in Haiti at this point. We need to help get governance in order in every way that we possibly can. But for those of you who are here today, this issue really cannot be resolved until the president takes responsibility. And our position in supporting this president is a failed position. It is not a good position. With that, I think I've taken up all of my time, but who on this panel agrees that there needs to be accountability from the president of Haiti?
Thank you, Congresswoman.
I yield back the balance of my time.
We're going to go our second round. There are a couple of members who have a couple of questions. Congressman Levin.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take a few minutes in closing to, first of all, recognize the leadership of some of my sisters who appeared before us here, and to note that it's not altogether common for multiple members of Congress who have simultaneous hearings going on to come and wave on to a subcommittee, Chairman Sears, to speak about this. So I want you to understand how much we care about Haiti and how much how intent we are on trying to, for our country at long last to take a more responsible and constructive position. Congresswoman Waters, Congresswoman Lee, Congresswoman Presley, Congresswoman Wilson, all came here. So I want to note that. Now, Ms. Douillon, let me just pick up something that you emphasized in your testimony. I am very concerned that there is a notion afoot, and has been for a long time, that Haiti is sort of a hopelessly failed state, and that it is impossible for Haiti to stand up a government based on the rule of law and democracy. And I think that's a racist notion. I think it's a notion based on hundreds of years of colonialism, going back to, back to when Haiti was a colony. But, you know, for the many years that France, after Haiti had the only successful national-level slave rebellion in history and kicked out Napoleon's army, France actually said Haiti had stolen its property, namely themselves and their own land, and demanded reparations, and the U.S. supported this position. And, you know, obviously I don't need to recite the whole history here. But let's talk about how we would actually, step by step, gather together the organizations of the civil society, stand up a transitional government, and move towards a new era of real sort of bottom-up democracy in Haiti. How do you see that happening? What are the steps we need to go through?
Thank you. First of all, I think even if now Haiti is a failed state, we're not condemned to being a failed state forever.
Amen.
And you mentioned Taiwan here, and I'm lucky enough to have received a scholarship to study in Taiwan. I've studied for 4.5 years, and I've studied how Taiwan went from poverty to the state they are now. This is a very inspiring story, and I don't see what prevents Haiti from doing the same except for corrupt officials and the fact that the international community is always somehow supporting them. Because we all know that those people are not using the foreign assistance, for example, to conduct the project they were supposed to do. But still, they give them more money. History is being written now. And for example, the US has supported dictatorship, Duvalier, and now it is being perceived that we are supporting a corrupt president, the first one to be indicted while he is in power, and the first one to have so many people taking to the street to ask for his resignation. I think we have planned for our country. There are so many groups from civil society, the youth, working on plan for 30 years plan, development plan for Haiti. They are the one who has done the fight against dictatorship. They are here, they want to help. There are so many people committed to fighting corruption and to build a new country now, and we need to invest in key priority. Haiti needs to be able to identify the priority. We don't need the solutions that are easy for NGOs to run, like just distributing food aid. This is not helping. We cannot feed 2.6 million people forever. Food security, we won't solve it by distributing food. We need to strengthen the agriculture sector. We need to invest in education. People who have studied abroad, a lot of people from my generation, we've studied abroad, we are qualified, yet we can't enter the public administration because it's crippled by corruption. There is no way they won't let us do anything there. This is what we want to change. We want to let people, give those people the opportunity to serve. And we need to trust the civil society. We need to trust the Petro Challenger. We need to trust those people who don't want to give up on Haiti now, those people who don't want to leave the country. I could have left Haiti. I could have come here. Canada is
I'm sure you'd be very
attracting-
successful here just based on your performance this morning.
Thank you, thank you.
No kidding.
Thank you, I appreciate. Like, Canada is attracting all our qualified Haitians. The brain drain is really severe. Like, if you have a master's degree, at some point you get tired and you leave. We don't want this. We want Haitians to serve Haiti. And we can just trust those people from the civil society and ensure that we fight gang violence, because they won't let us just change this country. They will fight for their interests. They are smuggling merchandise on the border. They are like having state contract, and it's a lot of corruption. They won't let it happen that easily. This is why we need support, and this is why we need also for the international community to believe that we can decide what's good for ourselves and we can find a Haitian-led solution to this crisis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congressman Meeks.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this very, very important hearing. I I listened to my colleague from Massachusetts, and I too, I think New York is the second largest number of Haitians. In Queens, I have a tremendous amount. And I would be remiss if I did not say that there is, that of course anybody that is from African American origin owes a deep debt of gratitude for the leaders of Haiti who decided that they were not going to be slaves and made sure that they wanted to be free. I also would be remiss if I did not say that one of the greatest frustrations that I've had in the 21 years that I've been a member of the United States Congress is the fact that for some reason, one way or the other, we seem not to have gotten Haiti right because the situation has not changed. We've had hopes. With certain times after elections with certain presidents, we thought that we were on a good path. And one way or another, something has happened, and whether it's corruption takes place, whether the policies of the United States, the money's going to the wrong place. I know in my own district, to a large part, it's divided, depending upon who I talk to. One says to do one thing, that I should be doing one thing as a member of Congress. Another group says I should be doing something else. It's absolutely wrong. When we're trying to figure out how to do it, I think ultimately the power does rest, when I listen to you, Mr. Guillaume, in the people of Haiti to decide to come together. When I see folks getting together, as I've seen recently in Hong Kong, they're fighting for democracy and trying to make sure that their voices are heard. Hopefully, that their voices will break through. The same thing, I think, has to happen, and we do need the fact that we have young people and women and others involved in the political process, because I don't see how we get it done without the political process. And to figure out how do we get good people to run and governments to be transparent. Ultimately, I don't see how the United States is going to be able to come in and demand or say that this is the person you should vote for, et cetera. It really has to come from the ground up and through and by the people of Haiti to make that determination, because we often talk about, when you think about colonialism and others, that's when other people come in and try to tell folks, this is what you need to do, this is how you have to do it, et cetera. And I don't want to be in a position to do those kinds of things as the United States government. That being said, I don't want us to spend our money in the wrong place that will cause damage to everyday Haitians. So, for example, one of the things that I was concerned about, I know when I talked to the State Department, they said that the U.S. assistance to the Haitian National Police has helped strengthen their capacity and increase their ranks to 15,000. However, was that the right thing for us to do, to increase that? Because I don't know. Because when I looked at the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, they found that at least 42 people have died during the recent protests, and 86 have been injured. And out of the 42 deaths, at least 19 can be attributed to the security forces. So do I want to give money to the Haitian National Police if, in fact, they are promoting human rights violations? No. Do I want to have peace and try to make sure that people are protected so that they can protest and do whatever they? Absolutely. So I'm in a position of trying to determine what should we do, what should I do as a member of the United States Congress, and the policies that we put forward and the money that we want to invest it, where should we do it, where should we put it, is it the right thing, is it the wrong thing? So I got a minute to go. Did I have anyone to answer those questions? Mr. Erickson.
Sure. I think that one very important role for Congress could be to go to Haiti soon and really assess the situation. Regarding the question of the Haitian National Police, I think ultimately civilian security in Haiti is going to depend on national police, right? We don't want the army to come back. But I do think that this requires more in-depth examination by Congress, either members of this committee or others who may be interested to investigate this. Thank you.
Oh, and just to add to that, I think it's very important you were saying what we should invest in. I think we should invest in local governance, strengthening local institutions. I think that is one of the best ways to move forward, to really strengthen Haitians and really also work with the grassroots civil society organizations and really build them up to be able to be those actors of change, those political champions that can really help move Haiti forward.
Yes, sir.
On croit faut que nous continuions à renforcer la police. C'est celle force sécurité que nous gagnons en Haïti. Si on parle n'importe l'autre force sécurité, c'est attaché ou pas appartenir à aucune institution.
I believe we should keep on reinforcing the security, the police force in Haiti. That's the only security force that we have in Haiti that is actually quite credible. Other groups would be like what we call the attached. They're attached to the government, but it's not the official force that we should really support is the security. The police force.
C'est vrai, police a un pile problème, il y a un pile policier qui impliqué dans la violation de droits monde, mais nous sommes capables de dire et si nous regardons l'autre institution, la police a mieux passé toute l'autre institution.
It is true that there are issues when it comes to the police force, but that's the only one that provides security, and we can even say that it is one of the most, if not the most credible institution that we have in Haiti.
Bon, parce que ça qui doit être fait pour la police, c'est pour nous continuer à veiller, continuer à bataille pour dépolitisation police là, parce qu'il y a des l'ordre qui sorti directement bon côté exécutif là qui joindre la police là.
What we need to keep on doing is to depoliticize the police force, because there are some orders that are coming from the politicians, from government officials to some members of the police.
Tant pis, pas mettre l'argent dans les Nations Unies, nous pas pour soldats ou bien policiers Nations Unies. Yo fait nous en pile tort et en Haïti, nous pas besoin de ça, pas bon pour nous, yo fait plus passer 14 ans récemment en Haïti, pas gain résultat. Donc et on nous continue de travailler et de nous renforcer la police noire.
Please don't try to get us soldiers and also members of the UN force, the Bluebirds, because they've spent almost 14 years in Haiti, and it's like sucking up money. It's better to try and reinforce the security force that we have in Haiti now.
Thank you. Congresswoman Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you for your questioning, Mr. Meeks, Congressman Meeks. This is a very complex issue, and we live in the United States, and we have corruption. We have corruption right in our White House, just like you have corruption in your president. And to find an answer to that corruption and to remove the president of Haiti, there is a process in place, and it's called impeachment in Haiti. What has happened to the impeachment process in Haiti as we tried to debate the transitional government, which the head of the judiciary would be in charge of? Explain all of that to me, because I hear so many sides of they tried to impeach the president, but people didn't show up, or what happened with the impeachment of Mr. Moise? Anyone know?
Yeah, I think I can comment on this. First of all, you mentioned that there is corruption in the U.S. as well, and some people say that there are corruption everywhere in the world. But this is not the same thing. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. We can't afford that level of corruption we have. And it's not affecting, the way it's affecting Haiti, it's not affecting the other countries. And the impeachment of the president, we had that one opportunity for the parliament to impeach the president. We had that process, but what happened is that they voted against it. But those same parliament members confessed to receiving money from the government to vote. Those same parliament members are the ones involved in scandal where they are wasting millions of goods to buy coffee and water while the people don't have access to potable water. There is a corrupt parliament where the majority are allies of the president, and they are basically taking money. It's so corrupt that they are allies of the president, yet they are taking money from the president and his party to vote when he needs their vote. So basically they came and then they didn't do what they were supposed to do. Most people were expecting, because the charges are here. And it could have been easy, this would have been done by now, but they didn't. Yet they are proud to confess that they received money and it's normal. And you may have seen on the news that some of them are really thugs and bandits, like fired a journalist. This is the kind of people who are in charge of the impeachment, and it's come to no surprise that it didn't work.
What role will they play in a transitional government? What role would the government that's in Haiti now play in a transitional government? How would that be structured with the president and with the parliament and the upper chamber, the senators?
Okay, I just want to add that for the moment, we don't have a legal government. The one we have now is illegal. We don't have a government, and the president hasn't been able to form one for the past 8 months.
Because they don't show up to work.
Because they only show up when they have their own interests and they are paid to. Otherwise, like for example, when they wanted to fire the prime minister, they all showed, and it was quick and easy, and they were all proud to say how efficient they are. But when they have to show up to do their jobs, they don't. And the president didn't organize election, therefore we won't have a parliament next year. Starting the second week of January, he will rule alone by decree. Therefore, we will only have 9 or 10 senators. It's not really clear how much people will stay because, as always, they always find a way to mess things up so there can be uncertainty, and they will have to find a political solution. Like it's a mandate that we should know for how long they will stay, but somehow no one knows exactly how many people should stay. But the fact is that we won't have a parliament for the second week of January next year, and we don't have a government now. And
Do you agree with Mr. Erickson about other nations coming in? Can Mr. Erickson repeat what he said in his testimony? I want Congressman Meek to hear him.
Sure. Well, just very briefly, I think that, I think we were in the middle of 3 crises, right? The historic one that we've discussed, the acute political crisis of the last 2 years, and the crisis of apathy and indifference in the international community. I think this hearing can help to address that latter one. But my proposal is, while all of this good work is going on in Haiti, to also re-energize the international community to see if it can help with some sort of political process to get Haiti past this impasse, which would be not just the United States, but the other members of the core group, which is a set of either countries or international institutions that have been engaged in Haiti that has actually been fairly dormant over the past 2 years. They include Brazil, Canada, the European Union, France, Spain, Germany, as well as the United Nations Organization and Organization of American States.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the members that came to the hearing, and I want to thank the witnesses. You've been terrific. You've been here for almost as long as the impeachment hearing. No. But I do thank you for your patience and your courage, some of the witnesses that are here today. And the challenges facing Haiti are significant and are not going away anytime soon. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues on a bipartisan basis to see how we can best use the resources of the United States government to help lift the Haitian people. Again, I thank you. I thank all the members for being here. And with that, this hearing is closed. Adjourned.
Thank you, brother.
Okay.
Appreciate you.